How'd that go?
Shoot his name in front of Paul Hammond, Sue members of the commission, and Dan Kinville, and a couple other people that it just was useful to
Good.
do a presentation on behalf of the city and like that.
We gotta put forward trying to help and irritate the governor.
To what?
Irritate the governor.
Here's $1.
Good evening. I'd like to welcome you to the Washougal City Council Workshop Meeting for Monday, November 14th, 2011. Mrs. Forsberg, could you call the roll, please?
Yes, good evening. Councilmember Coaston. Councilmember Shoemaker.
Here.
Councilmember McDaniel. Here. Councilmember Delavar.
Present.
Councilmember Greenlee.
Here.
Councilmember Morris.
Here.
And Councilmember Russell.
Have we heard anything from the two absent council
I didn't
members?
get any messages, no.
Okay. Are there any members of the public this evening that would like to address council? Okay, seeing none at the moment, we will move to our first presentation, strategic planning presentation. Joanne and Trevor.
Thank you, ma'am. Hey, Molly. Thank you. Tissue, okay.
Trev, do you want the lights off a little bit for the public?
Yeah, probably could.
Will you be able to read? There we go.
See a little bit better there?
Yeah.
All right, thank you for attending this evening. This is Strategic Planning's second check-in with council and the community members. Our presentation has 8 elements this evening. We'll have a review of the previous report to council, the resulting projects, the public engagement campaign, also the survey results, comments that we received at the different public engagement campaign events, specifically coffee conversations, the workshops, and also the interviews internally and externally. We'll also share the timeline where we're at today in the project, also the next steps, immediate next steps in the project, as well as council discussion to follow. Similar to the first check-in in June, we're gonna ask if we could hold the comments to the end. The way we've set up the PowerPoint on paper, the paper copy, you have the opportunity to make notes on the right side, and then we'll circle back and address those questions and or concerns towards the end of the presentation. Set the context of the strategic planning team. Mayor Gard, Administrator Scott, Joanne and myself, both strategic planning co-managers. We've also received assistance during the project.
Yeah, good. Pretty much stop right into it.
Better? No? Picking me up better now? Okay. You're right. So I had mentioned, we've also received assistance on the project from Organizational Consulting, which is Betsy Williams. Also the intern from the University of Portland, which is Ariana Nassib. She has helped us through the public engagement campaign and is still coming in and spotting and helping us close out the survey and the launch of the interviews for the advisory committee. Just to give you a quick caption of where we are currently, as you can see, working back to March of 2011. This project was actually discussed in January of 2011 at council retreat, right over here in the senior center. In March, Joanne and I were reassigned to the project and moved forward with the preliminary planning, which was the phase 1. Part of that phase 1 was the outreach effort, which included internal and external stakeholder interviews. And then we moved towards the public engagement campaign in phase 2 through June and closed out in late September, early October. And then we'll be moving forward, as you can see color-coded in green, towards conducting a strength, weakness, opportunity, and challenge analysis, developing that at the staff level and then working that through with the advisory committee and staff. Onward from there towards a mission, values, and vision statement, and moving towards phase 3, close out in December. So the foundation of the plan, why are we strategizing? 4 elements, key elements: who we are, where we want to go, how we will strive for our goals, and measure success over time, both short and long term, in measuring those specific successes. And the resulting document is a roadmap to the future, commonly known as strategic plan. So if you were in attendance for our first check-in in June, we talked about a living document, a document that we periodically check in on. This document needs to be updated, very similar to a master plan or comprehensive plan that we live in as far as municipal world, agency world within the government. This specific living document, the intent is for it to transcend, not only transcend administration, staff, elected officials, boards, committee members. It's the specific feedback from the community and its stakeholders that is going to be infused into the final product. And crucial tool, guide and shape decisions by establishing a framework for setting priorities. Informs leadership about citizens' priorities and assists city leaders with the allocation of limited resources, programs that matter most to the community and stakeholders. It also serves as a roadmap, and inside of the roadmap, we have a mission, vision, and core values with maximum impact for the future. Provides a process that allows general alignment. So as we move forward with developing the strategic plan and the roadmap, the staff and administration and elected officials, committees, boards are aligned with where we are, where we want to go, and how we measure and get towards establishing those goals and objectives. It also provides a basis for department business plans and leadership team performance reviews or performance appraisals, if you will. So you'll see illustrated before you a pyramid. At the top is the strategic plan, department business plans, and then at the bottom of the pyramid, a citywide performance plan. So the intent is for the strategic plan to cascade, if you will, throughout the organization and throughout the community, down through department business plans, where the feedback that we've received throughout the public engagement campaign, advisory committee, and drafting the roadmap, the strategic plan itself, is infused into individual department business plans, as well as the citywide performance plan.
Trev, before you begin this section, we just wanted to make sure that we thank everyone that participated in the process, from business owners to internal stakeholders to external stakeholders, the gamut, building industry people, and we just really appreciate that they took the time to be part of this process.
So in the context of the information that we've gathered through the public engagement campaign, we did have surveys, which we had electronic surveys that were on the city website. We had paper copies of the surveys that were distributed at farmers market, port concerts, high school events, you name it, as far as activities within the community. We also had comments at large throughout our workshops where individuals were able to offer feedback on large notebooks, so they could handwrite in comments if they weren't comfortable with electronic submittals or paper submittals. Some of the comments and results may reflect national and local environments as well as citizen experiences. So for example, we had walk and talk with businesses throughout the city. Joanne and I split up the town on Washougal River Road. Joanne had the west side, I had the east side, and we walked and talked with each business owner within the Washougal community. As we gained that feedback from the business owners, as far as caption where we are, as far as timeline, and in the middle of infrastructure improvements, a lot of the feedback was specific around either East Street being under construction, SR 14 Phase 1, other infrastructure improvements that could come into play as far as receiving that feedback. Also, some other indicators or specific things to be cognizant of. Great Recession, that's what it's been coined currently. Job concerns, and obviously the housing market as far as inventory. And I don't think Washougal and the Washougal community is in the minority on any of those concerns. That's more of a national concern that has affected us locally.
So I guess what we're trying to show here is that the results that we're going to show you tonight are just one piece of information. It's a very important piece of information because it's your citizens, your constituents, freely saying what they felt about things. And for the most part, everyone was anonymous, so no comments were associated with individual names. And so this is just one piece of the tool that'll help you determine what the direction of Washougal is. And can I also reiterate that the slides are in no particular order of priority or anything else. They're just thrown up there as they came on our paper. Okay, there's nothing there.
So at Project Kickoff, at its inception, Joanne and I discussed what's our target? How many people would we like to reach out to? What type of feedback and numbers can we point to say that it was a success? So in our initial research, a 5 to 10% outreach effort is a benchmark as far as strategic planning and the industry itself. And so looking at 5 to 10%, 700 to 1,400, current population is close to 14,000. Our total contacts to date is just under 1,300, and taking into consideration many of those outreach efforts did not have specific sign-up sheets when we had presentations to churches and other organizations where it was documented that was an outreach effort, but there was multiple people that were in attendance during that outreach effort. With the walk and talks with the commercial and industrial, just under 140 contacts. External and internal stakeholders, interviews, so not only staff level, but we did externals. Just to give you an example, we traveled north on Interstate 5 and met with the Lower Columbia Fish Recovery Board. We traveled up the gorge and met with Gorge to Trails, Friends of the Gorge, U.S. Forest Service, Fort Gorge Commission, Daniel Harkenrider, multiple interviews. Vested interest in East Clark County and the Washougal community, but reside in a different area. So those were all very good interviews. Presentations, as I had mentioned prior, coffee conversations and contractor coffee meetings. Public workshops, had 3 workshops, also had 3 coffee conversations at different locations. Farmers market and port concerts. Reached out to previous elected as well as appointed board members. service organizations, and survey boxes that we check regularly to retrieve paper copies of surveys and feedback.
Ignore the spelling error on that page. These are just an example of some of the outreaches. It's not an exhaustive list. So now we'll talk about the survey results.
Did you type one for them?
Yes. I'll try to talk louder.
Looking for the typo.
So prior to getting into the results, if you could explain in a little bit more detail in regards to the charts and
Right.
how the information was deciphered.
Yes, the information, when you see the tables, these were very specific questions that were asked on a survey. And they had choices. So sometimes you'll say, well, why doesn't things add up to 100%? And that's because a person could choose more than one answer. You'll see on other charts, or actually graphs, if the answer was yes or no, you'll see that everything adds up to 100%. So that's one explanation. Also, for instance, this question, the choices that a person had to choose from were excellent, good, fair, poor, they didn't know. But if you will see that these are showing you of the percentage of those that participated in it, it said things were excellent or good. Does that help with what you wanted to know?
Yes. So fairly self-explanatory, working from left to right. The highest percentage, or casted vote, if you will. As a place to live, 83%. Working towards the right, 32% as a place to work. So again, context of the climate that we're in as not only a nation, but as a local community. In between, neighborhood is a place to live, 78%. Overall quality, 75%. Place to raise children, 68%. And as a place to retire, 58%.
I think really, when you think about this, I think 83% of the respondents saying that the quality of life in Washougal was excellent or good was very encouraging to me. And then, of course, it wasn't a surprise to me that only 32% of those that responded said that it was an excellent place to work. So we have some work to do in that area.
Importance of services, very important, somewhat important. Scale as far as the survey. Fire and emergency medical services, quality drinking water, police services, public safety, emphasis obviously, street repairs, parks, 90%, street lighting, sidewalks, code enforcement, and street cleaning. Willingness to pay for services, yes responses specifically. And to dive into the question in a little bit more detail, it specified the willingness to pay through taxes or alternative financing with partnerships with the city or even public-private partnership. Fire, emergency medical services, police, quality drinking water, street repair, parks, street lighting, sidewalks, very similar to the previous slide. Current quality of services, excellent and good. We have drinking water, fire, emergency medical, police and parks, street cleaning, street lighting, and street repair at the far right at 31%.
And I think that 31% sends a message that only 31% of the people felt that we were doing an excellent job of, or a good job of street repair. Again, this could reflect the timing of the surveys in the fact that we had 2 major construction projects on the, underway.
So specific subjects that should be addressed in the strategic plan, and there's quite a bit of information here, but again, public safety, at the top with job and/or job creation around economic development or a portion of that, parks and trails, commercial development and land use, nature and aesthetics, downtown revitalization, elderly low-income opportunities, transportation, housing, growth, and tourism.
Can I just point out that if you looked at tourism at 58%, and you just think in your mind, wow, that rated really low. It really didn't, because what's that saying is 58% of the people that responded to the survey question said it was very important or somewhat important. So more than 50% said that.
It also specified on the survey if you've had contact with a city employee and/or staff member within the last 12 months. And so majority had 58% versus 42% that hadn't. And so we wanted to gauge that and rate it across 4 different specific silos: courtesy, knowledge, overall impression, and responsiveness. So as you look across excellent across all 4 different classifications, you know, you're right in between 45 to close to 60% is excellent, and 29 to 32% is good or above meeting expectations.
And as a comparable, I know of another city that had a similar survey, and their customer service did not rate at this high of a level. So I think that this is an excellent result.
It was a fairly open-ended question, so when we talk about regulatory, as far as issuing building permits or MPDS Phase 2, stormwater, whatever it may be, with the regulatory nature of conducting business, that also plays into the specific rating across the 4 different classifications.
Whoops, I went the wrong way, I apologize.
So I wanted to find out what exactly is the preferred way of keeping informed, specifically for citizens and stakeholders in the community. What's the best way to convey that information and/or connect with the citizenry? On the left, you'll see the city website, 77%, electronic mail, 62%, public forum or town meeting, which is what we're currently doing here, 55%, newsletter, direct mail, down to newspaper ad. Engagement opportunities, providing opportunities to be involved in the decision-making process as far as the citizens' ratings. What type of efforts has staff and/or administration, the city done to engage the citizenry to become part of the decision-making process? 6% excellent, good was at 36, fair at 31, 17% was poor, and about 10% had no opinion on this specific question. So what do citizens and stakeholders value most about Washougal? And so there was 7 different options. The top option was small town and small town feel. Scenic beauty, gateway to the gorge, close to the Columbia River Gorge, obviously. Nature, waterfront and access to the water. Safety of the community, recreation opportunities, and education system. Obviously, as far as core services and what the city provides, the city does not provide the education and/or the curriculum portion of Washougal, but we did want to gauge that and engage interlocally with the Washougal School District on that specific feedback. How big should Washougal grow? And so 20,000 population, 50%. And again, currently we're at 14,000 and change, I believe,
14,580, I believe.
581?
580, I believe.
Okay, so 14.5, so 50%, 20,000, so close to 4,500 more people. And then you take into consideration another 31 and a half, call it 32%, 25,000 population. And then larger population than that, upwards of 30, 35, and 40 was a smaller percentage. Joanne, did you want to discuss the current city limits and then what
Yes.
the urban growth boundary is set up for currently as far as population?
What was interesting about this was that we found that these results of what the community sees for their future as far as its size fits in perfectly with this current city urban growth area and what the city's comprehensive plan, which we are planning for a population of 23,418 by the year of 2024. So this just shows that the citizens' desires and what the city's planning for are consistent with one another.
Why do citizens and stakeholders live here? Quality of life, geographic location, family, job relocation, and then born and raised in Washougal, rounding out at 15%.
I think this slide to me represents the change in the demographics. When I first moved here in 1985, the population was around 4,000 people, and it stayed at that population for so many years. And everyone I met seemed to have been born and raised here. But if you remember during the boom, when we had that big housing boom and the big population of all the people that were moved here from California and Oregon, I think this is, this having the 15% living here because they were born and raised represents the change in our demographics.
So we received multiple comments throughout the internal and external interviews as well as the public engagement campaign. And again, these are not in a specific priority or strata, if you will, of prioritizing them. But we did receive multiple comments, and we'll bullet those out. So the top comments that we received through the public engagement campaign: commercial development, economic development, and jobs and/or job creation. Transportation, capital facility improvements around transportation. Parks and trails, downtown revitalization, police, fire, emergency medical, with emphasis around community safety. The highest number of comments we received were in regards to commercial development. As you'll see on the previous slides that have the bar charts, the slide indicates commercial development as number one. 83% of the respondents feel it is important and or somewhat important to address commercial development during the strategic planning process. Transportation was number two. Also taking into consideration E Street being under construction and SR 14 Phase 1 just starting construction late summer. We also heard and received many comments around SR 14 and what about SR 14 Phase 2 and the opportunity around 32nd Street and a potential interchange from 27th from the industrial park north towards the major arterial, which is E Street, to convey traffic. So again, the previous slide indicates that transportation is number two when you look back at the percentages. 96% of the respondents feel that street repair is very important. 70% feel that transportation is very important to address during the plan. And 31% felt that our current quality of street repair was excellent or good.
Can I just point out on the subject of transportation, it was on all the comments that we received, they were all unsolicited unless they were answering about 5 different questions that you'll see at the end of the slide. On the online survey, the telephone survey, the surveys that were left in boxes around town, there was just a place where you could put any comment about any subject you wanted. You see that transportation ranked really high for having the highest number of, highest numbers of comments. And then when you looked at the tables, you saw the percentage of the people that thought it was somewhat important or very important. I don't want to mislead you in this slide, all the comments regarding transportation weren't positive. There were negative ones as well, people giving their comment on what they felt about E Street, for example. However, the positive comments outnumbered the negative comments 3 to 1.
Questions? The positive comments just in general, or positive comments about East Street?
That's a very good question. The majority of the comments were on E Street, SR 14, and the projects that we were talking about, the overpass and things like that. So I'd have to go back and recalculate that 3 to 1, doing it just at Highway 14 and SR 14. But I can tell you that the majority of the comments were on those projects. There were other various comments, like it would be nice to have sidewalks on G Street, that sort of thing. But I'll get you clarification for that.
Parks and Trails was number 3. Again, previous slide supports that as far as the percentages. 90% feel that parks are important. 86% feel that it needs to be part of the strategic planning process, obviously. And 35% felt that recreation opportunities is something they value about Washougal. We've also got 62% current quality of park services and willingness to pay, again, through taxes and/or alternative financing through partnerships. Downtown revitalization was 4th. Again, previous slide supports the percentages. 75% of the respondents felt that downtown is very important or somewhat important to address during the strategic planning process. And police, fire, and emergency medical services, general concern around public safety. Again, slides support the percentages around fire at 98%, police at 96%. 86 and 81 indicate they're willing to pay for these services through alternative financing. 78 and 72 indicate the current quality of these services as either excellent or good. And 92% feel that it's very important to address this during the strategic planning process. 54% identify public safety, one of the things they most valued about Washougal. Other comments that we received, again, not in a prioritization order as far as how they're bulleted out, but we did hear this on a recurring basis and did want to bullet it out so you could see specifically what the comments were. Community activities and/or events that are available. Aesthetics of the community. Impact fees. Library. Senior citizens. Sidewalks. Tourism. Utility rates. Youth. Growth. And citizen communications. We did hear recurring themes around specific community activities. The availability of those specific activities for the community to engage, also special events. Aesthetics, dilapidated buildings, and that challenges Washougal as far as being attractive, curb appeal-wise, to businesses in regards to economic development. Impact fees, new growth should pay their way, if you will. Fees assessed to developers have not adequately addressed city services and transportation infrastructure. Library concerns, larger as far as capacity, and currently I believe we interlocal with Fort Vancouver Regional, but it does specify better and larger library. Senior citizens, senior housing, and hospital or medical services in closer proximity to the city of Washougal, and sidewalks in regards to schools and connection throughout the town. Tourism, seek out opportunities with close proximity to the Columbia River Gorge and the Washougal River. Utility rates should be raised for those using water. Rates increased annually rather than increased by a large jump. The costs are too high. And this really gets to a user specific of who is consuming that specific utility and or water, wastewater infrastructure. And youth, we had a few comments around nothing for kids to do in the community. And again, jobs. Business and industry comments. Business association needed. I think Joanne and I both experienced throughout the walk and talk with businesses throughout different areas within Washougal, the interest in creating a business association, whether that be in the industrial park specific and or East Street, downtown, west side with Washougal Crossing, Best Western in the port area. There was a definite interest, but they wanted it to be location specific. They felt that their needs, depending on where their location was and their type of business, needed to be case specific or association specific. The economy has hit the majority of businesses very hard, as we anticipated. Signage needed directly to downtown businesses, and I believe that's in regards to SR 14 and routing state route traffic to the downtown.
Yes, also though, they referenced that off of 32nd, there's no signs pointing to downtown businesses off of 32nd in Maine and Washougal River Road in Maine.
Website usability and functionality, ability to use the website to potentially advertise and or be a link as an asset for business owners or opportunity. Grand opening and or ribbon cutting after infrastructure improvements. We put East Street on here. We do have a aggressive capital improvement plan where we have multiple infrastructure improvements currently under construction. So taking into consideration a grand opening or memorializing those specific projects was brought up multiple times. Monthly newsletter, business and public electronic version, opportunities. So specific information during public workshops. I had mentioned the large tablets or boards where participants that attended the workshop would be able to write down what their ideas, dreams, priorities are for the community. So we had some key questions that we asked throughout the process, throughout those public engagement workshops. One of the questions was a vibrant and livable community includes what? Fairly open-ended. What opportunities can the community capitalize on? What exists and what does Washougal have to offer? Challenges. Challenges also included short-term and long-term. And also, what are your hopes and dreams for the community? And also provided ideas and suggestions, open-ended, for feedback.
And those are not provided to you tonight, but we will be using them in our next steps for creating draft vision and community value statements when we do our SWOT analysis and our department business plans.
Timeline, where we've been, where we are, where we're going with the project. So again, project kickoff and inception in March of this year. Internal and external stakeholder interviews, setting the context historically of where Washougal's been and where we are today, researching historical docs. Moving towards the public engagement campaign, phase 2, which closed out late summer, early fall. And currently conducting the strength, weakness, opportunity, and challenges analysis, also mission values and vision statements, which is scheduled to be completed in midwinter. From there, we move towards reevaluating previous work, forming the advisory committee, and sharing with them the SWOC for feedback and further analysis, solutions mission towards the values and vision, then get down to writing the strategic plan in the spring, around April, and adopting the strategic plan roadmap in May of 12.
I think this shows you, though, that we're right on time, right on our deadlines as far as our timeline that we outlined way back in March. So we're on track.
We've identified some immediate next steps in the project, developing a draft mission statement, as well as a values statement and vision, performing the strength, weakness, opportunity, and threat analysis, develop draft goals and strategies, and provide the above items to the advisory committee for its review, input, and recommendations. Later this week, we have multiple interviews with potential advisory committee members. We'll be closing out those interviews in the next 7 to 10 business days, and we'll be moving forward with our staff recommendations at that point. And with that,
Excellent presentation, thank you. Obviously, Joanne and Trevor have not been sitting on their laurels. Questions, specific questions from council, given the presentation? John?
Joanne, on the resident portion of this, not the business owners, but the residents that were interviewed, do you have any kind of demographic breakdown of those people that you spoke to, age, income, those kind of things?
We don't for age or income because we didn't ask those questions, but we do have a breakdown on making sure that we contacted a broad range of the city, that we weren't just receiving information from the Addie Street area or the Lookout Ridge area. So we could provide that information for you if you'd like. Trev, do you want to talk a little bit too about how we went about determining who we would call in the telephone surveys?
yeah, so I worked with the utility billing department in regards to utility bills and the random utility account number to be able to get both an east and west side. As almost everybody knows, we bill on a bi-monthly, so you only get a utility bill every 2 months. So I worked with our previous assistant finance director, RJ Stevenson, on a random sample to be able to task our intern, Ariana Nassib, with initiating those phone calls on both the east and west side. The demographics around age and or income were not taken into consideration, rather location, as we look at a comprehensive map to make sure that it goes all the way across Washougal
it's
proper
more-
as far as city limits.
More geographic is what you're
Right.
saying? Okay.
And we can get that color-coded and make that available to you if you'd like, the specific addresses that were contacted.
Well, I don't need specific addresses, I just,
Okay.
we just want to know what areas were represented
Okay.
in your findings, that's all.
Mr. Mayor. On the question of how big should Washougal grow, did you address the anomaly of the 35,000 answer?
Yes, it's just not presented there. Let
Okay.
me get that answer for you right now.
It's on page 9 on the notes.
35,000, 0.7% said that was their answer.
Right. I mean, it seems to me like the pattern here demonstrates more than just straight desire for these numbers. Because, take for instance, you've got 50% that say it should be 20,000. But I'll bet you that if the survey said 14,000, that would have a significant chunk of answers.
There was, one of the answers was no growth that they could choose from.
Okay, and how many respondents said that,
Uh,
percentage-wise?
That question was actually on the
Phone survey.
Phone survey, and I don't have a percentage next to it, but it's just a teeny little slither.
Hmm.
I can get you that percentage if you'd like.
Well, the reason I'm asking is because when I see a graph like this with numbers like this, it indicates to me that there's something else going on other than these numbers accurately reflecting exactly what people were responding to. Because, I mean, you've got decreasing numbers of choices. So the first selection says 20,000 people. You got half the people who say, yeah, 20,000 is good. And then you got 31% that say, well, 25,000. Then you got 11% that say 30,000. Then you got 0.7% that say 35. Then you jump back up to 6.2% for 40,000. So to me, that sort of indicates that there's something else going on other than just those numbers being their desired choice. You see what I'm saying?
Actually, I do not.
I don't either.
What are the odds that only 0.7% exactly want 35,000 versus
Oh, I
being
see.
sandwiched in between 30 and 40,000? Like they're that specific that we really, whatever we do, do not have 35,000 people here. See what I'm saying?
Right, well, they did not have the option of anything than going up in increments of 5,000. So the question wasn't open-ended where they could put any number in they desired.
Okay, I see.
What is interesting is, though, when you look at population growth, I mean, Trevor and I talk about all these different lessons that we've learned, if we do an update and how we might phrase things differently. I think it'd be very difficult if we let them put in any number to calculate the percentages. So I'm not saying that the 5,000 increment is the correct way, but it would be very difficult to report to you the information any other way. But another interesting fact is that people don't consider that in some cities, I'm not saying it's here in Washougal, the majority, and it hasn't been in our past, but population growth is associated with your children and your grandchildren growing up and buying homes in their own community, if it's a community that has jobs for them.
Just to set the context on the question, when the intern asked the question, the current population was given.
Yes.
Joanne and I also discussed our current population and the current inventory that we currently have that is already platted and approved for residential construction as far as empty lots throughout the east and west side of Washougal, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but gets close to that 20,000, which is what we have for inventory as we sit right now, not getting down into specifics, but.
Well, not necessarily platted lots, but land available for residential development. If you remember, in an urban growth area, there's huge areas that are employment centers, not just all residential.
John?
Yeah, what I think is interesting about that graph is that half of the population of Washougal likes it the way it is and maybe just a little higher, versus the other half of Washougal wants to see it grow. And so it's kind of an interesting, mix.
It is an interesting
two.
mix. You know, the population now is 14,000, say. Rose told me it was 14,210. Boy, I've been out of the loop, haven't I? So, you know, how many more is that? 6,000 more people would be 50% of the population's idea. But, you know, then also think about this, at least from working with at land use hearings, people have different perspectives of what that looks like. Some people say, yeah, if we had 6,000 more single-family homes on 1-acre parcels, that's what my idea is, a population of 20,000. Someone else is thinking, yeah, having 20,000 people with lots of green space, but they live in these cottage homes with all this open space around them. So you also have to think about that as well, but that could be just my land use planning hat on.
6,000 single-family residents. Let's not go there. Dave?
Were you referring to the fact that it's not a logical progression?
Yeah, it indicates to me that 40,000 may just be the most. And so, I mean, if you had 45, I'll bet you that 45,000 would be 0.05, and 40,000 would be 0.05, and 45,000 would be 6%. That's what I'm saying. So, I
Well,
mean, there's probably 6% that say a lot bigger, and they just pick the biggest number, and that's what they want. Whereas, how many people really only want 35,000? If it's 0.7%, that, to me, that doesn't follow on a bell curve at all.
Well,
The outliers.
I
Yeah.
see your thinking right now. However, we can't go back and redo the question.
Mhm.
So it's something to consider if we go and do an update in the future.
Well, also, the question itself led the witness, if you will, because there was a formula that was given to people for what they should apply for how much is reasonable for growth. When I saw that question, into my mind, it thought, basically you're testing their math skills at how well they apply your formula to the question at hand. And that may or may not be, completely legitimate data based on how they apply the formula.
I think, I understand your points of view, and it's certainly a different way to look at it that we could consider for next time. And you also need to consider this question in with other questions about the responses to what they value about the community. Also, when you see the responses to what makes a vibrant and exciting community. So you take that all in together. I wouldn't say that it's scientific.
Right, but you brought it up, and that reminds me of that other question about what type of services are they willing to pay for. On page 6, there is a question. I do remember this question being ambiguous when I was taking a look at it first, because the question itself, it's slide 18 on yours.
18, I'm sorry.
Because it basically asks the question, are your willingness to pay for services? But it doesn't exactly imply increased taxes versus existing taxes.
That word was purposely left out.
But those are two different questions completely.
Mhm. So the response you have is for the one that you see before you.
Well, no, slide 18 is what I mean. When I saw that question on the questionnaire, it does not define whether or not, are you willing to pay for services through taxes or alternative financing partnership with the city? Is that increased taxes or is it existing? See?
It doesn't say.
Because most people can, or I should say, I won't say most people, but a person can very easily say, I pay this amount, or I think I pay this amount in taxes, property taxes, sales taxes, you name it. And so of that pie that I pay, whatever it happens to be, which ones of these am I interested in funding? Versus, if I had to add a tax to add services, which one am I interested in paying for? I mean, those are wildly separate answers there. One assumes that they're going to take it anyway. The other one assumes that if I ask for this service, I'm going to have to pay more, especially with the alternative financing partnerships, like a local improvement district or something like that. That's a completely separate thing other than the pie that's already being taken out of my paycheck. That's all I'm saying, is that it's kind of ambiguous with that question.
Other questions from council? Paul?
I just wanted to make a comment. I'll go into it in more detail. I spent all day at the Washington State Transportation Commission hearing, which was down at the Port of Vancouver today. One of the great quotes that came out of there that's apropos to your most recent comment was made by a senator from New York, in which he said, "There is no such thing as a free lunch. All there is an argument over who's going to pay for it." So I think people understand that. I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that there is no such thing as a free lunch.
Other questions for Joanna, Trevor? Molly?
Yes, I know you've talked about this, but I find it interesting that transportation had the second highest number of comments. And were you able to tease out at all, when it comes to street repair, people that specifically targeted current construction projects versus general street maintenance and repair in general? And kind of separate them out?
We didn't, but we could, because we have all the comments listed specifically. So we could separate those out for you.
Okay.
Would it be okay, there's been a couple questions that we can respond by email tomorrow or the next day.
John?
Just real quick, when you asked about when you asked about the contact with city staff, were there more than two options of excellent and good? Or how did you guys come
Yes.
about those numbers?
There was, just a moment here. They could choose between excellent, good, fair, poor, or no opinion at all.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? You're continuing on your road. Any, Trevor or Joanne, anything specifically that you need from the council as you start moving towards your next steps?
No, but I do want to thank Councilmember Shoemaker, who's given his input when asked on different ideas that Trevor and I have for a mission statement.
Thank you very much for the update. Do you have this available if anybody in the public wants to get it electronically? And
We're going to have it put on the website tomorrow.
excellent.
We wanted council to be sure that the information was provided to him before anyone else.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Good luck in the next steps. Okay, moving into agenda bills, community development. Mitch, it looks like we need to set a couple of public hearings.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Councilors. The first agenda bill, BA1, is to set a public hearing for the Washougal School District Capital Facility Plan and an update to the impact fee. The district is proposing an update to their plan for the 2011-2017 capital facility plan, and as well as update to their impact fee in the amount of $2,683 for single family and $2,689 for multifamily. The Planning Commission actual recommendation to you is for $2,000 on the multifamily fee. So the agenda bill for next week is just to set the public hearing for December 5th on that item.
Okay. Molly?
What's the current multifamily impact fee?
2,000,
Oh, it is?
yes.
Huh, okay.
Agenda
Dave,
bill VA2,
David?
oh, I'm sorry.
Part of that would miss. It says 2683 for single family and 2689 for multifamily. Is that per housing unit or is that per building?
That's per unit. So the single-family rate is $2,683 per house.
Yep.
And then a multifamily would be $2,689 per unit within that dwelling.
So if you got four
Within-
units in a building, you got $10,000 worth?
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
John?
Mr. Mayor, we still have the deferment process in place, is that correct?
No, not for school impact fees.
No, no, I'm not talking about school. I mean everything else.
All our impact fees, yes. The school was not, didn't necessarily want to go along with us on their deferral of their fees.
Have we reapproached them about doing that?
I don't believe we have.
We have
We can
not.
certainly have that discussion with them during the public hearing or even before that as well, if you want to bring it up to Marnie.
They will be here on the 28th for their presentation prior to the hearing on the 5th.
Okay, thank you.
Dave?
One last question, if I may. Do you know what the Planning Commission's rationale for recommending a $2,000 fee for multi-unit housing is?
They didn't want to see, we haven't had any multifamily units over the last year, and so they didn't want to see anything really basically get in the way that could inhibit that development from occurring, and thought that that increase would be something that would do that.
Are we not overrepresented through, in comparison with other cities in the county in that particular regard, in multi-housing?
We have existing multifamily, we just haven't had any new multifamily come in.
But haven't we got more of a supply of it?
We have a pretty good supply of multifamily, yes.
Okay.
And we have definitely a better supply of land available for multifamily, but we just don't have the developments coming in.
Okay,
I think that's pretty consistent, though.
thanks.
Okay, any other questions on Washougal's impact fees? Okay, Camus?
Agenda Bill VA2, exactly the same, forwarded in from you from Camus. However, the fee amounts are different. The fee amount for this single family is $4,460, and the multifamily is $2,604. And again, the Planning Commission recommendation is to keep it at $2,000 for a multifamily. Again, this is an agenda bill to set the public hearing for December 5th.
Questions? Paul?
Just, it would be helpful during the public hearing to have a map that showed what part of the city of Washougal is in the Camas School District,
Okay.
so that we can think a little bit about whether there's any multifamily going in there or not, and what that might mean.
Okay.
Any other questions for Mitch? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Public Works, Mr. Dunn. A couple CDBG projects that you'd like to bring forward.
Yes, these are a couple of community development block grant applications, and we'd just like to set a public hearing. We discussed, if you may remember, on the 7th. I think Rob Charles was in attendance at that time, and we would just like to set a public hearing for both of these community development block grant applications for the 21st. And I'm not sure in, what type of detail Rob got into on the 7th, but one application is for some sidewalk improvements on Addy Street, near 32nd Street. It would tie in our intersection improvements and that 32nd Street to Addy, and then along the north side to the park. And then the other application is for ADA improvements at City Hall, which would be modifying the restroom facilities, some automatic door openers, our front counter, things like that. So are there any questions on either of those two applications?
Dave?
Yes.
Jim, the match for this one would be $138,000. Is that coming out of reserves?
No, that's with our proposed budget for 2012. That's included.
But is that money to fund that coming out of reserves into an account for this?
I think, yeah, in a roundabout way, I guess you could say yes.
Councilman Shoemaker, a little bit further on in the agenda is the item for the 2011 supplemental budget, which seeks to reestablish the building facilities fund and to reseed that with some funds from our general unrestricted reserves. You may be recalling from our budget workshop, and then also to create a transportation capital facilities fund, and to create that this year and seed it. And that seeding would also come from our general unrestricted reserves.
Thanks. And it's all of that that prompted the question. I just want to make sure that I understand it. Thanks, Jim. And I'm sorry I didn't call you in advance. I usually let you know what I'm going to ask. I don't want to
No,
surprise
that's
you, but
fine.
took
I
you by
thought you were
surprise on
going
that
to ask
one.
me about the reporting requirements.
Okay.
Molly?
On the Addy Street and 32nd, is that going to actually give us continuous sidewalks on the north side of Addy from the park and then up across the railroad tracks or up to the tracks?
We're going to do our best. There's a $300,000 limit, so we can go ahead and apply next year if we don't get there, but we're going to do our best to get that continuous sidewalk, up to the park, we're hoping.
Other questions for Jim on either one of the items? Okay, thank you, Jim. Now on to some fun finance items. Jennifer, you've got our budget amendment ordinance first.
Yes, council members and mayor. In your packet, you have the budget amendment or proposed budget amendment for the 2011 budget to establish the Transportation Capital Projects Fund and reestablishing the Facility Capital Projects Fund by seeding these two funds with reserve funds in the amount of $1.25 million. $500,000 is proposed to go to the Facilities Capital Projects Fund, and $750,000 would go to the Transportation Capital Projects Fund. No expenditures would be requested for 2011, but then we do have expenditures requested for the 2012 budget out of these two funds. So the recommended action would be to read the ordinance by title only, amending the 2011 budget, and pass, post, and publish the ordinance in the usual manner. And I also provided the draft ordinance and then the support from the meetings, the workshop meeting 2 meetings ago, where we went through the budget amendments in pretty good detail. So I thought I would just open that up for questions at this point.
Questions on movements of the dollars, and just so everybody's aware, these, without any doubt, these are movements from our unrestricted reserves to these two accounts, however you want to look at them, in order to seed them for additional usages as needed, and/or in the case of the transportation fund, basically to use those monies set aside dedicated to transportation matching funds, so that as we are even in the process of applying for grants, we can legitimately and appropriately answer the questions, yes, that we have appropriate funds set aside for the matching side of those. So basically on that one, we're intending to use that for all intents and purposes to generate more money without using all of ours in those processes. The facilities fund, as some of you may remember, at the end of 2009, the former administration's budget included a sweep of that entire account into the general reserves and away from a facilities fund in order to be able to maintain our buildings and the things that we need to do inside there. There are also, as you can see in the previous agenda bills, there are some of those grant opportunities out there where we also need to have matching funds even for those as well. I know a couple of years ago, there were questions from the questions and comments, both from council and also from the public in regards to some of the school impact fees and where they were in their capital facilities programs, and the fact that they've got buildings, but they didn't necessarily set aside funds in order to maintain the buildings, which caused them the problem of having some that are degrading faster than others. This is an attempt to try and make sure that we don't end up in that same boat, and that we're taking care of literally the roofs and the doors and what we need to make sure that our buildings stay in the best possible shape as far as repair is concerned. Certainly doesn't look towards creating any funds, though, to go out and build anything new, so they're pretty much towards the maintenance side. Dave?
I'll defer to Michael there.
Okay, thank you. So I was taking a look at the next year's budget, which we'll be discussing later, but specifically about these two funds. In next year's budget, we're going to be setting aside, if I understand, $30,000 in each fund. And that's, I assume the plan is to have $30,000 every year put away into those funds,
From operating funds,
from operating funds?
not from reserves, but from operating funds.
Right, right. Yeah, exactly. From tax revenues coming in to budget $60,000 for these two funds
Right.
total. Okay, so in taking a look at the proposed budget for 2012, though, the expenditure that's budgeting and being budgeted for those two funds totals $413,000. So the discussion point I've got here is, if we're going to be putting in $60,000 and taking out $400,000 next year, you know, that looks like it's kind of a not lopsided, unsustainable thing, if we should expect it to be that the way in years to come. So the big question I've got with this, and you can see where this is going, I know that we have probably some irregularly spaced updates that we need to do, whether it's roofing or re-roofing or, you know, completely updating some of our buildings. Is that mapped out yet for how much expenditure total we have and when those expenditures are going to be required?
Some of them are.
Yeah, I don't believe we have a comprehensive and complete building facilities maintenance schedule for those major upgrades. We have some of that, and it's that information which is informing the immediate proposed expenditures for 2012, as well as the matching for the CDBG grant for the compliance issue that we have around the ADA. But we're working on developing that type of a document to better inform future expenditures. And that 30,000 to each fund that we're seeking to operationalize beginning in 2012, there was no science, if you would, to coming up with that number, but it was manageable within the confines of a balanced budget. And we felt it was important to try to operationalize as much as possible, just like with the vehicle ER&R, our saving for maintenance and repairs and replacement. And I think one thing to point out that would be important is that the initial seeding and therefore initial appropriation that's in excess of that operational funding is reflective of the one-time nature of what we're doing, and it's also reflective, at least on the building facility side, of the fact that there had been planning proactively for that up until a couple years ago. The numbers were there was a little south of $700,000 that were in the building contingency fund, and we're proposing to bring 500 of that back. Is that correct? And then on the transportation side, 750. The only expenditure, if you would, on the transportation side in 12 that is is something that we're kind of committed to. Doesn't have to come from that fund per se, but something that we're committed to is our successful grant for the 32nd Street intersection improvements, which is one of the top priorities of your transportation facilities plan. We're on the hook for that matching. And so this fund, that initial appropriation provides for that, as well as then the sidewalk matching if that is a project after the public hearing you decide to go forward with.
David?
First of all, I have to compliment the administration for thinking ahead and setting up funds like this. I think it's a great idea, and I support the concept. I see the guiding hand of Dave Scott and Jennifer Forsberg in this, based on your financial experience. I support that. The only thing that I find to disagree with in this proposal is using the reserves to set up the new account. We did that for a couple of accounts last year, totaling about, I think, 1.2 million. And so we're about to hit the reserves again for, I think the total that we were hitting them for this year was around 1.7.
The net result of what reserves will be used is still undetermined because of a little bit rosier picture in terms of expenditures and revenues. I can't remember what your latest projection was after the third quarter, Jen. We can find that.
That's okay, you don't need to go into it now.
Okay,
And
but
I
it's-
appreciate the difficulty of doing that.
It's going to be better. This time last year, when we made those appropriations and the purposeful use of the reserves, the number is higher than what it will actually be, including the supplementals, because a little bit better revenue and a little tighter control on operating expenditures.
Yeah. And I understand the desire to get some of these projects done. I want to get them done too. The only objection I have is one of principle, and that's reaching for the reserves to do it. And I will work with you to see how far my conscience will allow me to go on that.
Yeah, certainly a reminder for council and for the public as well, even though if the council sees so fit to reestablish the one fund and to establish the other one, you certainly have the ability to pull those dollars back at any time. You know, while we're kind of sort of in our minds saying we want to use them for these purposes and use them to attract grant dollars so that our dollars go farther, there is nothing that precludes the council at any time for pulling those back and literally making that change to where they are available to any general expenditure. In fact, I don't know that we even need to pull them back. Even though we establish them into a fund, they're still general fund dollars.
They're still general fund dollars, but I believe that we would ask for a supplemental budget just to cleanly bring them back into the general fund for absolute general expenditures. And I think really the question that will be before the council with the supplemental budget, because it doesn't include any appropriations, is simply, should we earmark to some extent the unrestricted general fund reserves that we have, those funds being beyond your policy set-aside reserves, still retaining quite a significant sum, over north of $1 million in continuing general fund unrestricted reserves. Should there be some of that that is earmarked toward planning for the future for our buildings and facilities is our proposal, as well as one of the important things in the community, which is to get after our transportation capital facilities plan. That's really the fundamental question that's before you for the supplemental budget. Should we do it that way, or should we leave them all in the big bucket of general fund unrestricted reserves? Because you could still appropriate all of those projects, or some of those projects, out of your general fund. Our sense of it is that by setting them aside into specifically targeted funds, you articulate your priorities, if you would, to those that would be observing. And it gives us some guidance around what those funds are set aside for. But you still retain the ultimate flexibility. So the supplemental budget itself is less about the appropriations and more about sort of that perspective that you might want to take. And if it's your pleasure to do that, then they would be earmarked in that way. Then, as part of your 2012 budget conversation, what you would spend, and is it appropriate to apply for one or both of those CDBG grants, et cetera, could be, the topic of conversation. If it's not your pleasure to create those funds, those conversations can still occur because they are your general fund unrestricted reserves. And short of having those two funds, I think the administration would still propose to you those expenditures.
Molly, did you have?
Yeah, it would just seem like good planning to me to go back and have those two funds in the supplemental budget. The council will still have the opportunity to choose to expend those funds or not, and to decide on what projects they want. But it would be very poor planning to not be able to look out into the future and have a fund for facilities and transportation each, because we know we have facilities that are in dire need of some TLC maybe, and maybe even some obvious improvements, and transportation as well. I mean, it's obvious that in the strategic plan, transportation came in very strong. So it would seem to me to, at least in the supplemental budget, to allocate these two funds, to actually put aside a mark for those two, yeah.
David?
And therein lies my conundrum. I don't want to give a green light to clear the track, to put us on a headlong down the track effort to spend the money. What I want to do is take a look at each project as it comes up and
But you
clear
would
each one.
still- You would still need to do that.
Yeah. And I'm concerned about funding this from the reserve, and that's my sole primary consideration. And as I say, I'd like to work with you on this. Help me clear my conscience enough to support what you need to do.
Other questions from council? Paul?
Refresh my memory, David. We've recently, I think, changed the number on, there is a number below which council does not need to approve a particular contract. I think it used to be $5,000. Anything above that, that is a contract, council has to vote on. Do I have that correct?
I'm going to defer to Jennifer for the procurement thresholds for contracting.
I believe it's 7,500 is the limit.
So anything over 7,500 would have to pass by the council.
If it was not specifically budgeted and if it's a contract as the policy currently exists, yes.
Thank you.
Other comments, questions on the agenda bill itself? Okay. 2012 property tax resolution for the general fund.
Okay. Council and Mayor, this resolution will represent the needed documentation to set the general tax rates for 2012. By adopting the resolution, the city's property tax rate will increase by 1% to preserve the maximum levy capacity for 2013 when the temporary lid lift expires. The 2012 rate will be capped at the statutory maximum. So just to, as a refresher, this doesn't increase property taxes for 2012 by 1%. It's just preserving the capacity to give the council a tool in 2013 should they desire to actually increase tax rates at that time. It sets aside and preserves that capacity for council to determine what to do at that point when the lid lift expires. We have a draft copy of the resolution, but we're still waiting for the final numbers from the assessor, so I've left a couple blanks in there, but those will be filled in by next week. And recommended action will be to read the resolution by title only and pass and post in the usual manner.
Dave?
So if I understand it correctly, the average, or the impact on the average, or any property owner is going to be zero
Correct,
in terms of increased taxes.
correct,
It's the capacity we're
correct.
retaining. Okay, thank you.
Michael?
So when exactly does the temporary lid lift expire?
2013,
So January 1st, 2013?
correct.
Okay. So when the council in 2012 is going to be passing the budget at that time, they will have the option of raising taxes, keeping it the same, reserving capacity. So if we're only talking about the temporary lid lift, then wouldn't we really be talking about both the 1% that we're preserving capacity now, as well as the potential 1% increase at the end of 2012? Or talk me through that.
Well, it depends on where if we're still capped out or not.
But let's assume for a moment that we're still capped out and that home prices don't increase, then this would have no effect.
You
And-
just keep rolling it.
Correct.
Basically, for each year that you enacted, it just continues to roll that flexibility beam there.
Right.
Until we have the capacity to be able to do something with the banked amount.
Okay, so what would be the effect? Because assuming the prices don't rise again, what would be the effect of not passing this and then reviewing at the end of 2012, reviewing, the temporary lid lift expiring at that point? What would be the effect?
You would be limited to the levy amount from 2006 plus any capacity banking that you already passed. And remind me, Jen, which years there was capacity that was banked?
I believe it's just 2010, and then we're requesting, so maybe 10 and 11.
So a
I
challenge.
believe we banked 11. I believe we lost 10.
Did we lose 10? Was it 10 that we lost? I can't remember if it was 9 or 10.
When we lost it during the library levy.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. So,
So right now, you've got 1% banked.
right.
Right.
This declining assessed valuation context has introduced a dynamic that's heretofore really, in my experience and others' experience, something we haven't dealt with before, and it's been introduced an interesting dynamic where multiple years of banking is a possibility in a, and I don't know if it's right to call it normal, in what used to be normal, where we saw some level of growth in the economy and around the assessed values of our properties and equipment. The council had the choice, councilmanically, of increasing your total levy amount by 1% per year. With the declining AV, you did not have that option because of your rate getting capped. By preserving that, your banking acts as if you still had the opportunity to do that year after year after year, such that when the rate capacity opens up because of relief on assessed valuation growth, and that we get some, then you have the option basically to look in the rearview mirror and say, what would we have done if we had had that capacity? And would we now cumulatively, retroactively go back and recapture what we could have done councilmanically if it had been our pleasure and grab the 1% for those previous years? Now, you've got the ability to do that for last year because you passed that banking. If you do that again this year, there'd be 2 of those that you would have at your disposal. Depending upon how that all plays out, there may not be anything to lift.
Right.
You have to have something to lift. If you get capped, you still can't lift beyond some limits, and it gets very complex. But it could be, depending upon what happens, that both of these questions are moot this time next year, and frankly, it would be a third cycle of essentially the exact same resolution before you with slightly different numbers. That could be tolerable in terms of our EMS services because that's what the lift is for, because of that Fund 125 and the supplanting dollars that we have, and we still have some funding in there that would kind of make up for the fact that there'd be an expiration on the lift. That's very good for the community, I believe, because then maybe in 2 years from now, perhaps it's a viable conversation for the council to talk about, do we want to do a lift again? And if so, how would we do that? And maybe start talking about the fact that we have the EMS levy, and we combine that with the lift. And is that the appropriate way to fund EMS, or should we roll it all into one levy and not use a lift? And so there'll be some interesting conversation about what's the appropriate way to fund. And we really won't know until this time next year whether, this is one more year of this being an exercise, or whether you will have an opportunity to do something if it's your pleasure.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's one of the key things to remember in this is really what you're doing is, should you adopt the resolution, you're just keeping the ability to assess that if you choose to do it, but you would certainly need to look at it as a single question at some point in the future and make that decision. It's not, we bank it, that doesn't mean that we're automatically gonna, at some point, it's gonna trigger itself and it's gonna go out and do that. You'll still have to take another vote at some time in the future in order to do that with any amount of the banking, if at any time it becomes available. Paul?
I'll go into more detail later, but there was considerable conversation at the Washington Transportation Commission today about the situation where you have a municipality who is pleading for transportation funds, what's called mobility, which is basically new interchanges, the kind of thing that we want to do at SR 14 and go across the overpass at 27th and so forth, that you have a number of communities who are pleading for those kinds of funds who have taken a pass on their 1% levy. And it seems pretty clear that both the legislature and the executive branch are going to consider that in their scoring for grants. That if the community is not willing to step up and say, yes, this is a priority, yes, we really need this, that there are plenty of other priorities in the state that will draw those transportation funds. In our case, we're relatively unusual. There are not a lot of communities who are capped out at the maximum millage rate as we are. There are relatively few statewide. And that does create a special case in which they would want to see that we banked it for that future moment that we could possibly use it. But I'm concerned that if it's going to be, pulling teeth does not adequately describe how difficult it's going to be to get transportation money, and passing on the banking is going to make it darn near impossible. Just as a quick aside, there was a law that was passed a number of years ago that increased the gas tax, and all of that revenue was bonded and then turned into financing for projects. So all of that gas tax increment is now paying off that bonding. That money is already committed to projects, and SR 14 Phase 1 is one of them. Don Wagner, who's the WSDOT district manager for 7 counties in Southwest Washington, went through a list of projects that have been completed, are underway, or whatever, and it totals, off the top of my head, I think it was $935 million total in 7 counties. Less than half of that has actually been spent at this point. Almost all of it gets spent in 2011, 2012, and 2013. He has no funded projects in 2014. None. So it's going to, transportation funding is, everybody is worried. We're not quite willing to say that the sky is falling, but it's not far from that. The governor and the legislature will be talking seriously. It's pretty clear that gas tax no longer works as a funding mechanism, that there will have to be something else done. And using general tax revenues is also unacceptable. So there will be, somehow over the next few years, we'll have to work out a new way of funding our highways and bridges, and actually railroad projects too. I mean, the Port of Vancouver is spending millions and millions on railroad projects that will substantially increase their economic development and possibilities. So we need to be careful here, is all I would suggest.
Other comments, questions on the resolution? Okay. Moving on to the 2012 budget ordinance.
The 2012 preliminary budget was made available to the public on October 24th, and a public hearing is set to be held next Monday, November 21st, and was advertised once a week for 2 weeks as required by law. We've discussed it at several workshops and are going to open it up for questions tonight. But our recommended action will be to read the ordinance by title only and pass, post, and publish in the usual manner. There was a few typos in the book regarding FTEs, and for the sake of saving paper, I didn't print them out for the 2 that I found so far. The finance department should have a 1 for the assistant finance director position and a 0 for the accounting manager position. It's currently flip-flopped. The net effect is the same FTE, just different titles. And then same with the police department position for the proposed captain. and the sergeants would decrease by 1. So again, the net effect is 0. So if you'd like a new printout, I can print them out for you, but I figured we could just mention those tonight. And then I've attached the draft ordinances as the budget is currently proposed. And I also have debt information that was requested at the last workshop, if you'd like to go over that first, or we can answer questions regarding the budget first. I'll leave it up to the mayor.
I'll leave it up to the council.
Mr. Mayor, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask a question about the ordinance itself.
Okay.
Down at the bottom of the ordinance, it says, the preliminary budget for the city of Washougal for the fiscal year ending so-and-so, as revised by the mayor. I think that's supposed to be submitted, right? Or is it revised? Just
I
clarifying.
actually noticed that as we were sitting here earlier, and I followed last year, so I can check on that wording. And Don has not reviewed these yet, as it's a workshop, so he will be reviewing them this week to make sure
Not
that
really
it's
substantive.
in the
I just
proper
thought it
form.
might, I mean, because the mayor submits the budget and then it's revised if we need to, but I think we're getting the mayor's budget, if I understand correctly. If I could just ask a question, because I happened to stumble on this, asking myself a question this afternoon when I was looking at this. I'm talking about Fund 610 specifically. When I was taking a look at the budget math, I think the math doesn't add up. I could be wrong about this. Maybe I'm just not looking at it right. Maybe you can help me on this.
Okay.
And I'd give you a page number, but I don't have one. I'm sorry.
If it's on the downtown bond, good luck.
Yeah, I know. And mainly, it has to do with the beginning fund balance. It doesn't mention expenditures out of that. And what really brought that to mind is that I was, in taking a look at the 2012 budget, the project revenue, in other words, the operating revenue that we're putting into that fund is $60,000. And yet the expenses for the budget for how much we're budgeting for money going out is 0, right? So I was hoping to get a fuller explanation for this fund, because it's a little fuzzy on some level, but as far as the math is concerned, the ending fund balances don't completely add up. I think the final number is pretty close from what I can add up.
Yeah, I think it would probably take a master mathematician to try and figure that one out. No, seriously, we fund that one primarily through our REIT income that we get to go towards the retirement of the downtown bond. It's, for the public, those of you that may not know, the downtown improvements were done with, Trevor, $6.5 million of bond. The odd part about it, the oddest part about the thing, is that it does not have anything close to a level repayment plan.
Okay.
It might have 0 in one year, it might have 380,000 in another year, it might have 60,000 the next year, it might have 0. It is bizarre.
Okay.
And we can find no reason for it other than the repayment schedule that is there. That one, if you try and track it from year to year on the dollars going in and the dollars going out, will make absolutely no sense that I've found,
Right, no,
other
you're-
than
I'm
it
laughing because
follows,
you're correct.
other than it follows some, whatever was put together by
Right.
the bond preparers when they did it.
Okay.
Correct.
I actually remember a little bit of that. The problem for the bond underwriters was that we had several other bonds that we're paying on and that they would be retired. And so you wanted to keep the percentage of general fund indebtedness below a certain level. And once those other bonds were repaid, then you could increase the payment. But as long as the original bonds existed, it was an underwriting problem that was solved by creating this unusual repayment schedule.
That doesn't come anywhere near answering your question, but I don't know that, I believe somebody could get it all to add up when it's all said and done, but trying to put any sort of logic or why this or why that to it,
Right.
I don't know that we have an answer on that one.
We just track the amortization schedule on the debt repayment.
That makes sense. When I was taking a look at the math on the explanation page, it lists the budget for how much money is going in, but the beginning fund balance remained the same in 11 and in 12. So it just seemed a little odd when you track that a little bit. But it's, by my math, it's pretty close as far as the 720 versus what I calculated for 732. But once again, I don't know if this page actually explains how much money was paid back into the bond. So that may be the thing that I'm missing there.
The debt payments come out of the REIT funds. They don't come out. This is gearing up for the future payments as well. So the actual expenditures to pay the debt come out of the REIT.
So in other
they're not
words,
budgeted out of this.
so money
610.
goes in, but it doesn't come out of this yet?
Correct.
Until much later, sort of like a balloon payment?
Correct.
That we're preparing for? Okay. Well, in that case, are you comfortable with those numbers on that page? Because, I mean, if you just take a look at the beginning
Right.
one, the beginning fund
beginning
balance in
fund balance.
2010 was 600,000. You add 12.5, and the number adds up
Right.
down the bottom, 612.5. Next.
No,
you
I
did-
see what you're saying. I will
Yeah,
correct that.
yeah, 2011, you would expect that to begin with the same as your ending fund balance the previous year. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
Anyway, and if you do that math, in the simple terms that I was doing it, the final number is 732.5. Anyway, so
Okay.
just to be aware.
Thank you.
We're into the budget, let's go ahead and stay on budget. Budget questions, account questions, funding levels. Anybody want to jump in? Michael?
Sure. I think it might be wise for us to have a general discussion for a couple of moments, and maybe if we get too bogged down on this, just to retire the discussion. But I know we've had portions of this discussion, and this is, I think, the best place to have it with regards to this discussion about reserves versus unencumbered reserves and what this is and what it means. I agree with a lot of the philosophy of the administration that we do need to set aside money in dedicated. We can't really do much more than just earmarking and creating like Fund 351 and 353, saying this is money that's dedicated towards these projects, and if we need to, we can pull it out and use it for other funds. I understand that. I think it might be wise for us, and I wanted to open up the discussion to other council members here very briefly, or in just a couple seconds. It might be wise for us to consider either earmarking all of our excess dollars in excess of the actual reserves, or else taking that excess money after we figure we've got our capital facilities, transportation, capital projects, however much money we think we need to put into those reserve projects, beyond those budgeted amounts which we think are appropriate. We have extra money there, which is approaching, what, $1 million, I think, afterwards?
1.4.
Okay, so 1.4 million. So the question we have is, if we have this $1.4 million sitting in our bank account, is it wise for us to either take our ER&R fund, put more money in there, or the capital facilities capital project, or take this money and pay it back towards some of our debts that we can retire? And I completely understand when it comes to terminology, the idea that if we say something is extra money, that it's easy to say it's reserves. But the question is it really truly reserve, or is it just extra money that has been taken from the people that wasn't needed necessarily, and therefore should be returned to the people? And that's where, if it's returned to the people, probably the best way we could return it to them is decreasing our indebtedness, which also provides for a stronger financial picture in the future.
That's a good question.
Yeah, that is a good question.
John?
And with that, can we see the indebtedness that we have? That'd be great. Thank you.
Can
I make a comment while she's pulling that up?
You bet.
Okay, great. It's good that we have this conversation. I've actually been wanting to have this conversation because if you take a look at the auditor and the way that they look at our books and our financials, you'll see that they actually do not call the excess general funds reserved at all. They call them unreserved general funds. And so when we've all used the term reserves kind of loosely when we're talking about extra funds that we have over and above our real reserves, which are the 60% or whatever we have in our policy. So I think it's interesting that we have this discussion. I think it's important.
In fact, my memory is that the auditor actually calls them ending fund balances. The word reserve doesn't come into it until you start talking about equipment repair and replacement reserves, or our operating reserve, which is the 16% number.
Right. No, I believe the term is unreserved general funds.
But
Got
yeah,
it. I know you
the
wanna-
concept of reserve, it's really a term of art within the accounting community that doesn't mean nearly what you think it would mean.
Jennifer?
I was just going to mention that in 2010, the auditors have actually changed the format for the breakout of the ending fund balance to where you have to mark what is legally restricted as reserved balance, and then whatever's above your policy of 16% is listed in the general fund anyway as unrestricted reserves.
Good for them.
They changed that since I was on finance.
It is a new 2010 reporting requirement.
Do we, for the public, do we need to adjust the lights for these slides?
Yeah, I can't see.
Because I can't see it at all.
I don't know which one of these it is.
That didn't do
Got
it.
Thank you.
No.
Is that better?
No,
Nope.
we need the ones in
Need the
front.
ones closest to it.
Not that one.
There we go.
There we go.
Okay, no snoring. No snoring.
Yeah, and this didn't quite work the way it was supposed to. But what this shows is our current debt current as of the end of 2010 for the best reporting. The top three are shaded because it links to our schedule of indebtedness. Yeah, it's not gonna be, I should have printed it out, I apologize. So what I did is I went through and listed the interest rates for each of the debt, the year that it'll be paid in full, and then if we can prepay it,
And when?
and when. So you can see the after 2012, after 2016. With the NA, the first one is actually going to be paid in full in 2011. So, woohoo, we're gonna pay it off. And then the Public Works Trust Fund loans, we can repay those out of the water sewer funds.
Jennifer, your ones that you have on there on the prepayment NA, does that mean that we do not have the option to pay those early?
No, that means we do have the option. If there's an option, or if there's a requirement, that's the date I listed.
Gotcha, so if it says NA, we can pay them off anytime?
There's no penalty for prepayment if it says NA.
At any time, not?
Correct.
Okay. Rod?
Jennifer, I have a question along with Councilman Delavar's thoughts. What does it do if we take that 1.4 and pay some off or spend it in a number of ways on our bond rating? Does it change anything there when in fact we do go out for another bond somewhere down the road? Does that help us in that aspect of the bond rating?
It would be in the eye of the bond rater, but it would lower the debt to equity. But with the reserves, their general fund, which can help, and typically when we go out for bond, lately anyway, it's been on the water sewer storm side, so it's kind of different buckets of money. But to point out the schedule, another schedule that shows what our debt capacity currently is and what percent we're utilizing. For a Councilmatic bond amount, we're authorized based on our assessment as of the end of 2010 for 18 million, I believe that's 18 million. dollars that the council could approve in councilmanic bonding. And currently, we've got 5.2 of that encumbered. So we have a remaining debt capacity that the city could go out for funding of $12.8 million.
One good
Without a
size,
vote of the people.
one good size water treatment project, huh?
Yeah. That's right about what Camus's total upgrade was a $12 million project.
So then breaking out the voted part, we have a capacity of 12.1 and 1.1, which is the police building, which was a voted, approved project, gives us capacity of 10.9. And then the utility purposes, since the bonds that we've taken out are revenue back, they're not included here. So that's why there's the full 30 million available. And then same for parks, we don't have any current debt on that.
And you've got printouts for council for all this?
I did not print them out before the meeting, but I can print them out and get them or email them, whichever you prefer.
That would be great.
I apologize, I thought it would fit better on the screen. It looks nice on my monitor, but.
Well, another companion part to this discussion is how much interest we currently are earning on the 1.4.
So that's currently broken up in the local government investment pool, which has not been over 1% in some time. And then we do have some funds at a rate of 1.34 that will probably get called. I'm sure I'll get a notice here shortly because of what the interest market is currently doing. But the rest of, most of our money that's currently in those longer term bonds is the water sewer bond money that we're not currently utilizing.
So, as far as which $1.4 million could be paying down some of our debt, what is your best estimate? So the 1.34?
1.34 and 0.58 are the current general funds that are in the long-term or it's not long-term, I mean, it's another year or so, but it's longer than the LGIP.
Okay, thank you.
And then what, Paul, go ahead.
Explain, there were several LIDs up there. Would you explain what those are and talk a little bit about who's paying them and whether that's city indebtedness and so forth?
The LIDs are included in the city's debt for total purposes, but it's not the city's debt. It's levied against the properties of the people that live within the LID, and they are responsible for the payments. So that's why it's NA on the no prepayment penalties, because folks can pay that off as soon as they wish, or they can take it out to the full term of the LID.
And Jennifer, we don't touch those dollars at all?
No,
Okay.
only to pay the debt. Let me qualify that.
So it does go through our books?
It does go through our books. We receipt that in from the property owners pay the city directly, and we do have the fund set up. That's why you see the appropriations and the funding in there. And then we make the payments, I believe, semi-annually.
Okay, so we do have a trigger if, for some reason, somebody is not paying or a home goes into foreclosure, that type of stuff, in order to lien the property for that LID itself.
Correct. And the
Okay.
title companies know
Yeah,
to
of course.
contact us. We've done a pretty good education for the title companies so that they do contact us to inform property owners that they are, if there's outstanding balances.
So do they, just a general question on that, if a home sells that is inside that LID area and that is paying to the LID, when it sells, do they pay off the LID, their portion of the LID at that point, or does it carry over to the next property owner?
It depends on the title company's transaction. Typically, they will have the current owner pay to the time, or pay the annual payment, and then it transfers with the property. Or the new buyer may have that be part of their deal, that the seller pay it off. So it's just part of that real estate transaction, and we don't get involved. We just give them totals when they want totals, and it stays with the property ultimately.
Okay, so it's not automatic that it would get paid off if that property sells?
Correct.
Okay. David?
Two questions, if I may. First one is, any of those rates, interest rates, variable?
I don't believe so, no. On the debt side?
On the long-term debt?
No, not that I'm aware of.
I'm relieved. Second question, given the low rates we're paying and the inflation that's about to wash over us in the next couple of years, at this point, would you recommend paying off any indebtedness, or would you hang in there and let inflation take away the sting of the indebtedness payment every month, every year?
I don't know that I'm completely qualified to answer that, but it would just depend on what happens to the rates. I mean, obviously, I think the mortgage rates are still coming down. So it would depend on what the current market is. We have asked Mr. Nelson, our bond rater, if we could refinance any of these bonds, if they would be within the point structure of being a good deal to restructure or pay down if we could. And his only advice was on the voter-approved one, but through analysis, it wasn't a big enough change to the taxpayer ultimately to justify the cost of going back out to refinance that. And the 1.4 doesn't, I mean, we could pay some of it down, I guess, but there's probably better uses in the long term for those funds to be able to provide benefit to the community that's ongoing in the future.
And my concern is if we're going to look at that, we look at it very carefully, because I think the inflation rates that are about to hit us in the next couple of years are going to make that look like peanuts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. John?
Talk to me about the first one. Talk to me about the first one that's on that list.
The limited geo bond?
Yes.
I believe that one was originally issued in 2000. Let me get up there. And it's part of, it's what's left over of the refunding bond that we did in 2005, I believe. And so that's just gradually getting paid off. It was the portion that didn't get rolled over into the new bond package.
Okay.
Answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Paul?
In regards to inflation, generally speaking, we assume that the markets, in fact, the current rate or the forward rates, are the most knowledgeable projection as to the future. To assume otherwise, you would have to assume that the people who are buying and selling bonds today professionally are idiots. And that is not well supported by history. That historically, bond traders have done a pretty good job of being able to tell what the inflation hit is going to be over the term of the bonds that they're trading. And if you look at the return profiles on present bonds, either corporate, municipal, or federal, we don't see inflation, significant inflation, in 3, 4, 5 years. And the crystal ball gets foggier the further you go out, but it's certainly true that the professional traders, the markets, do not see the kind of inflation that you're talking about.
David?
Just briefly, I'll believe that when I see it. I think we're in for some difficult times, and I hope you're right, Paul. I'd like to be wrong on this one.
Any other questions for Jennifer on the bonds and/or investments?
Right, Mr. Mayor. All right, so I know you told us what the shading was for the top part, and that's, so it begs the question, I think this is where John was asking earlier about that first top item. Is that something that we can prepay for the top line?
I believe so. I couldn't find before, within last week and today, the actual bond covenant for that yet. But since it's going to be paid in full in 2015, I would assume we are within the clear to pay that off early. And the shaded means that combined in the calculation right here, the 5.2. The shaded ones are included in that 5.2 million.
The reason I ask about that one is because, I mean, that's a pretty high interest rate right there. And even though we may not be talking about a very long term between here and 2015, if we were to pay at least that portion off, the other bonds look like they're fairly close to the interest that we're paying, but that one is sort of an outlier, and it would be, I think it might be a wise use of our money to pay that off so we don't have to pay the extra interest on that one.
Yeah, and I also, I agree with you on that. I think the other thing to look at too is that the police station will be up after this next year, and something to look for the next budget if we've got the same amount in, and, you know, surplus funds to be able to pay that off. I think the voters would really appreciate that. So.
Mr. Mayor? With the budget proposal, would it be, how easy would it be for us to amend when we have the public hearing on the 21st? How easy would it be for us to amend the budget to include paying off that first bond?
Very easy.
It's a spreadsheet, so it'll be easy to.
As far as paperwork is concerned, just to make it easy, I would request that we have that as an option.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other questions for Jen before she shuts down that portion and gets us all copies?
I do, actually. That line item, the slide before, is that a monthly payment, a quarterly payment, a yearly payment? What are we looking at with that BOFA?
It is an annual payment.
It's an annual payment? Okay, fantastic. And do you know what it is?
It looks like on the amortization schedule that I have here, it's about 99,000 a year.
Okay, so if we paid that off, that would significantly change the budget.
Excuse me?
In general, that would change our expenditures, what our expenditures look like for the remainder of the years following.
Correct. And in future years, it would decrease expenditures by that amount.
Okay, great, thank you.
Any other questions on bonds or investments? Okay, ready to jump back into general budget itself?
Okay.
Molly, could you grab the lights?
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
Is that better?
Define better. Questions in regards to other funds and the budget? David?
I'm looking at the first couple of pages of the budgets and looking at the funds. And the bottom line is we've got projected revenue of 23 million and proposed budget is 21 million. And I guess the question is, how are we going to make that up? Have I misinterpreted something here?
The major difference is the use of the bond money, because
Yeah.
these are all funds. It's not just general fund on that page. So it's the use of the bond funds that we got this year, the 16 million
The utility bonds.
for the utility
projects.
bonds for projects.
Okay, now it makes sense. I was looking at the $6 million deficit and trying to figure out where we're going to get there.
Nope, we've already got it.
Okay, thank you.
Michael?
Fund 510, is that for unemployment benefits?
Correct.
That we're required to pay? Yeah. So that's pretty significant difference between revenue that's going in that's earmarked for it versus money that's being expended for it. Do you have any projections for where that's going to be going in the future, or why there's that sharp difference between the two?
The additions to the fund were part of the budget cost savings in the past, because our requirement is, I can't remember the exact how many times over what we're supposed to have in that fund by policy or by code versus what was in the fund. So we're still stable without adding additional revenues in 2012. And
Last
then
year
we do
added
have.
nothing.
So we were able to not budget for that again in the revenue side, because that would come from individual departments.
If I
I
remember,
believe is how
without
that
going into
paid
it,
in.
there's $380,000 or something like that in that fund?
I'd have to
Or
look.
was?
It was, yes, it had a very 392 was the projected ending fund balance in 10. So yes, roughly 300,000 in 11, it looks like.
So in other words, for this fund, we need to keep a certain percentage by law, and then the 61,500 expenditures are just what we expect to be able to, or to be required to spend out of that?
Correct. We have a couple folks that
Gotcha.
are currently on unemployment, so that is why the expense has increased.
Okay, gotcha, thank you.
Other fund questions?
All
Jennifer?
right. Lots of questions. Let's see. First, I want to start with human resources. I sent a question over to Jen regarding the tuition reimbursement. Seemed like a rather high amount. And if you can remind me of the dollar figures you've been given me over the past couple of years.
I'm sorry, what page, Jennifer?
That is,
Not pageant.
there's no
HR.
number, human resources, Fund
Under HR.
001-07. Okay, good to know. They're invisible. Get out my
Page 16 and 17, I
Lemon.
apologize again for not having
lemon
page
juice.
numbers printed on there.
Okay, so if you could go over what we've spent in the past couple of years.
In the past few years.
Yeah.
We looked back at the city policy regarding tuition reimbursement, and it actually went back, I believe, as far back as 1996. Obviously, last year, we didn't offer the tuition reimbursement program. '09 was kind of a wrap-up year. There was very minimal, $676. 2006, 7, and 8 were larger expenditure years with roughly $5,000 in 2006, $8,600 in 2007, and then $18,000 in 2008 were the expenses for the tuition reimbursement program, where folks within city employment were able to go to school and get reimbursed as long as they got, I believe, a C or higher
Right.
on the course.
Right, it jumped out at me just because I see, a $9 amount for 2010 actuals and a nada for
It's not a
2011
comparable
budget.
comparison on that line item, because in the past, it was done by department by department.
Departments.
So what we're proposing, should this be included, is kind of an overhaul to the program where it's going to be managed out of human resources in a pool situation versus individually in the department level, so that we are able to track it better and have better controls over it, so that it is easier to compare from year to year to year, because we actually had to go through the system and search by department and by person to try to figure out those totals, because there wasn't a clear
Okay, so this is
picture.
actual, say, advanced education, not certification.
So it would be college credit. It's not like the annual training certifications that the water folks need to
Right.
have their
Right.
job. It is for degreed programs.
Okay, interesting. All right, and the other thing I had a question about is the professional services for human resources also. I just wanted to see some actuals for 2011. I know we're not to the end of the year yet, but it just seems rather high. I mean, 2010, we spent a total of $2,600. We asked for $24,000 in 2011 and $24,000 yet again in 2012, and why? And
Jeanette, some of that is taken up in potential arbitration
Correct.
for fire?
That's pretty much
Oh, I
a
see.
buffer.
Placeholder, as you know, we're in negotiations with fire right now.
I see.
Plus a significant amount of money in legal expenses if we go to IntraStar. So it's a placeholder primarily for that. I do have some other incidental legal fees and some software that come out of that budget, but that's the bulk of the anticipated expenses that hopefully we won't need.
So the majority of that won't be used for this year, but will
Right.
carry it over for
It'll
next
carry
year. So it's
over.
hopefully
Okay.
we'll
I see, that's, okay.
And hopefully we'll come back to you and tell you we won't need it at all because we reached agreement.
Would be good.
Do you mind if I just
No,
jump in real
no.
quickly? I just wanted to ask about the tuition reimbursement. Is that mandated or by contract, or is that just policy?
It's a policy in our employment policies, our personnel policies, that if funded, then we have a program for tuition reimbursement, and it's been deployed over the years. We will be proposing to you next month some amendments to that to tighten that policy up, if you would, in a couple of ways. One of the proposals will be to provide a benchmark for reimbursement at the Washington State University level, so that, which is common practice, that you set a benchmark, and we're not reimbursing at Harvard, we're reimbursing at Washington State levels. And then the other is to provide for a repayment scenario where an employee who hasn't enjoyed the benefit of tuition reimbursement and then leaves service voluntarily within a certain time frame is responsible for reimbursement of the tuition reimbursement. And what we will be proposing just specifically would be 100% reimbursement back to us within 1 year, and then 50% between a year and 2 years, which is a fairly common payback scenario, if you would, in a tuition reimbursement program.
Sure. Kind of piggybacking on that, not to get too specific as far as classes are concerned, but is obviously, I'm sure there's something in there that talks about the applicability of the classes they're taking to what they're doing here at the city.
Absolutely. It's very specific, requires department head and administrative approval. It is to be directly related to a current position or a reasonably prospective position within the city. Common example of reimbursed programs would be public administration programs at both the baccalaureate and master's level. But you could see engineering for someone that was in public works and would aspire to a city engineer type position. And you might see something in accounting or finance for those that are working in that department that would aspire to a higher level position in that area. Those would be your most common. We don't have many other disciplines, if you would, that would really be applicable.
Fire science, police administration, but, you know, some of those that are
Correct.
continuing education ones.
Right, if there was an officer or a firefighter that was looking for some degree credentialing to, you know, aspire into captain or command positions, that would also be something that would probably be applicable. I think most of the time you see public administration type coursework and programs as the request. That's been my experience in multiple communities.
Great. That's it for that. Should I just move on?
You bet.
Great.
Absolutely.
Let's see. Finance, that's the next page. Why are we still budgeting for a financial consultant in 2012? I'm just curious. So I had asked Jen for a breakdown on the professional services for that particular department.
We've included it as a buffer in case we need some forecasting for Mr. Lewis. There were also some items identified in strategic planning where there's holes in our current policies and procedures that with the interim time of not having an accountant on staff yet, to where I haven't been able to get to those policies and procedures, it would behoove us to be able to have somebody write those procedures for us to stay in the positive with the, you know, compliance with the state auditor's office and having those policies and procedures in place. So it was something that we were requesting to have assistance with.
And when do you expect to have the city accountant in place?
We have closed the application process and have 5 candidates that we're planning on interviewing within the next few weeks. With the holidays, I believe most, if not all of them, are currently employed, so there would be some sort of time lapse between when they could give notice and start. So with the holidays and giving notice, it most optimistically would be probably the end of the year, if not the beginning of next year. We were hoping to have it move a little bit faster, but you just have to go with the flow.
Mhm. Okay. Well, I don't know, I think just my personal opinion, since most of our staff, by the time budget season rolls around next year, should be pretty well comfortable in their position, and I just don't, the forecasting bit is great, and I think we needed it 2 years ago, when we first hired Paul Lewis, but it's my personal opinion that, we should be able to crank out a budget now that we've got all of our staff in place, and we will have the final piece, which is the city accountant, pretty soon. Just my personal opinion.
Yeah, I think two things I think are gonna factor in there. One, for the most part, we don't pay Paul to do the budgets themselves. Truly, when you get into the forecasting side, that's really where he's supplying us a lot of the help now, plus the 2 policies that he's helped put together that we really needed to get in place in order to affect this budget in here. I don't know when you're gonna have an accountant on board. I'm gonna take a guess and say June is before they're really gonna have their feet under them
Right.
and be up and be moving. At the same time, and there are some, there are a number of policies and procedures we don't have in place today. Joanna and Trevor may be able to give you some of that information now because it starts to get into some of those business plans for the departments. We've got, I think it's fair to say that there is an ungoshly amount of work to be done on those policies that, quite frankly, we've kind of been given a pass to some degree of not having in place yet. I think our aim, and part of these dollars in here, are to get those completed in 2012 off the boards completely, so that any of the backlog of where we should be are completed. And I think that'll go a long ways with the auditors as well as they come through with their audit again in 2012.
Okay, so you see this as sort of just kind of cleanup work?
It's not really cleanup work. It is, some of it is creation of policies, some of it is complete overhaul of policies that are so outdated and so old. They still, to some, well, Jennifer, you tell me, to some degree, they function, but not really.
I think one of the biggest areas is the procurement and contract management, putting those policies and procedures in place with change orders and some of those things to have a uniform structure in place to make sure that we're consistent and following the same practices on every instance is probably one of the biggest weaknesses that we currently have. And just linking the procurement policy with the contract policy to the change order policy to the bid law policy, and just having all those links together to make sure that everything flows properly through and smoothly so that we can track each project and each grant source and stay in line with regulations and state laws. And that's just one of the list of many that
I think it would be shocking to folks who aren't in here on a regular basis how often the discussion comes up on something and the comment is made, we don't have a policy on that. And it's something that, quite frankly, none of us would, other than those that know that we don't have the policy, you would assume they are things that we would have policies and procedures for. And to some degree, I guess you'd call some of that cleanup. I sincerely believe, while it was a wonderful thing that this city didn't staff up a ton, while things were growing, everything else, call it from 2000 to 2010, I think things got amazingly complicated in that time, and some things just didn't get done. And at this point, Jennifer's trying to affect some things as she has time. Other people are. We certainly put Paul in his contract on the 2 larger items that we had on the ER&R and the repayment programs. So at some point, we've just got to get them done and completed. Right now, in the next year, given the turnover in her department, granted, we'll be where we need to be in bodies. but I don't think you could really call it full FTEs that are completely on board going for the entire year at the capacity that they'll have once they're in place and going.
There will be a learning curve. I keep hoping the learning curve won't be there, but in all reality, yes, there will be a steep learning curve, especially with the grant management side of the house and that sort of thing that we're expecting the accountant to jump right in and do.
Okay. Moving on to general government. That's Fund 001-99.
Page 24 and 25, if you have.
Okay, yeah. Disappearing ink again. Okay. SR 14, design professional services. We're budgeting 15,000 for 2012, and 33,000 2011. Didn't we just expense this? It was 40-ish something $1,000 recently?
That's rollover. We're not expecting to have the contract completed by the end of the year.
I
So
see.
we won't expend the full 33,000 in 2011, so we're just
I
rolling
see.
some of that forward.
I see, okay. All right, and professional services under West Columbia Gorge Humane Society, I see that was completely cut for 2012, and I'm kind of hoping that we can have an open and honest discussion roundtable here at the council regarding funding this particular management contract for our animal shelter, and if we're going to consider this a priority or not. I personally do, obviously.
Mr. Mayor? I'd like to have a broader discussion about this if we could, from the standpoint of talking about animal control and the relationship there, and just kind of give us a baseline of what animal control is going to be doing in our relationship with them, with the Humane Society, going into the next year.
Do you want to take that, Dave?
Thank you, Mayor. Council, I could give you a brief update on status of conversations with West Columbia Gorge and what this budget reflects. We communicated with West Columbia Gorge that our desired approach as an administration and what we told them last year at this time as we would move into this year was that we would move into a relationship with them where we were procuring a service which was really a per dog based type service as opposed to a lump sum payment, and that we would seek to compare what the cost of obtaining that service from another provider would be, and that we would then inform them of what that would be and the administration's willingness to accommodate in the budget that cost, because we have to impound animals that either our animal control officers collect or that citizens voluntarily turn in. And so we did that with Southwest because really that's the only other viable service provider. And there was sort of late-breaking news here within just the last couple of weeks that Southwest is increasing their per animal charge beginning next year to $120 from $70. All of that to say that expenditure per dog is going to increase countywide for anyone that receives services from Southwest Washington, which is basically everyone other than Camas and Washougal. So we priced that out. We looked at the profile of dogs that we've had over a 12-month period, September into October, and how that all played out with West Columbia, and what would it cost us if we were to go to Southwest Washington to receive those services. And we came up with a number, and I let the treasurer at West Columbia Gorge know about that late last week in advance of their board meeting, and she responded to me earlier this week that they were interested in continuing the relationship to keep the service local, fully understanding the administration's intent to expend that level to receive those services. So I would fully anticipate, unless something would change, I would fully anticipate that. And it turns out that just as a side, it turns out that the number, which is in the $8,000 to $9,000 range, is already accommodated in the budget. It's in the animal control line item. And so,
Is that's the significant increase in professional services?
in animal control, I would
Yes,
imagine.
that was
yes.
one of my
Right.
questions.
And so, if the budget is passed in this specific regard, the way it is currently proposed, there'll be adequate appropriation for us to fulfill our obligations regarding impounding animals that we collect or that are voluntarily brought in, both at West Columbia Gorge or any overflow that has to go to Southwest. And we would then bring before you an adjusted professional service agreement with West Columbia Gorge, which would essentially put us into a relationship with them that would be identical to the type of relationship we would have with Southwest, where how funds are change hands and how the services are provided. And so really, the question becomes less one of budget, unless you are, as a council, interested in doing something beyond paying for that basic service. But just assuming, just for the sake of discussion now, that your interest is to pay for that basic service, the budget accommodates it. The question would be, which service provider, through a professional services agreement, should provide the service? I think they will both provide the service. The only difference that I would be aware of is that perhaps there may be some more hours available to the public at Southwest, just because of economies of scale and their ability to be open longer. So for basically the same dollar, you would be local with West Columbia Gorge, have somewhat reduced access for the public just because of how they're able to accommodate that, versus what you would have at Southwest. And it's my understanding, this could change, but depending on, I haven't had a detailed conversation with Amanda yet, but my sense is we would be bringing forward as an administration that professional services agreement sometime next month, and that we would continue that relationship, but it would be different. It would be more along the lines of what we do with Southwest Washington. So that's the update as of yesterday.
Okay, good.
Dave?
I'm glad to hear it.
Have you factored into your calculations the fact that West Gorge is located right down on Index Street, and Southwest is over on 192nd, I think it is?
They're on 192nd.
So the amount of time that it would take to travel over there for the animal control officers and come back would be, have you factored that into your considerations?
Quite frankly, that's one that, it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. We keep in mind that we handle animal control for Camas and Washougal both, which means that we could pick up a dog in Camas at Camas Meadows Golf Course and be within a quarter mile of the Southwest Washington Humane Society. But when we're taking them to the West Columbia Gorge, now we're transporting all the way back over here. Our service level goes to within a quarter mile of the facility. The fact that we've got one here is certainly advantageous, and the other services that they provide are advantageous as well. But travel time, and quite frankly, we don't come right back with Fido right now anyway. It's done on a basis of as they're out there in call volume and that type of thing, so.
I had considered that. I guess my other question would be, what is the distribution of the calls between Washougal and Camas?
It's a little, Chief, it's a little bit higher in Washougal than it is in Camas as far as actual impounded dogs. Not marginally, but 60-40.
It varies from month to month, but if you look at it, average it out over the year, we do have, Washougal have a slightly higher income.
Are you discriminating against Washougal dogs?
Yeah, we
Thanks,
just
Mr.
have
Mayor.
more of them. But it really, that question gets asked a lot. And to me, it's not so much, it's more like where the police station is. It doesn't matter where the police station is, because the patrol cars, if they're doing what we hope they're doing most of the time, are out there moving everywhere anyway. Same thing with the animal control vehicles. They're moving. One facility's on the west side, one's closer to the east side. But we just, it's not like prisoners. We don't go right back, and that's why they have multiple cages in those vehicles, so. Molly?
I think I understand what Dave's saying, and one of the things I really like about this approach is that it is much more equitable between the cities of Camas and Washougal. And that was something I had major heartburn with in previous years, was that the city of Washougal, call it compassion or culture, we have had a professional services agreement with the West Columbia Gorge Humane Society, and that is inequitable when Camas did not do so. So at least if we fund it on a per animal basis at a higher rate, we're actually making it a lot more equitable.
The program's improving each year, there's
Yeah.
no doubt. Unfortunately, we're dealing with it more each year, which.
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm very pleased to hear that there are ongoing discussions with the West Columbia Gorge Humane Society, and hopefully this will, be an agreement that everyone will be happy with, and we can move forward, and they can stay open and perform their duties. And you're saying you're looking at a PSA for January?
Yeah, ours ends the end of the year.
Yeah, we would try to bring it back for you next month. There'll be probably several updates to PSAs that are more ongoing and interlocals. Call it cleanup, not really, but things that we need to bring to you right at the end of the year. So probably mid-December workshop and December 19th action is what we're targeting. And if anything changes between now and next week, we certainly can provide you an update.
That would be great. Thank you. Okay, moving on to Fund 001-04 Parks. I don't know what page that is. Parks.
Page 40.
Okay. Okay, I'm just curious about the discretionary fund. I see that the Parks Board discretionary fund has been cut altogether. And I'm just curious to know, why?
Could be an oversight, because I don't remember having that discussion.
Yeah, I don't remember the discussion either, so unfortunately, I don't know the answer tonight on that. As far as the parks discretionary funds.
Okay, so possibly an error? An error?
Ooh.
Possibly. You missed, I think I caught something.
I'm sure the Parks Board will be thrilled to
I'm
hear
sure
that.
they will. They can write me a thank you note. All right, where else?
May I interject a question?
Yep.
I noticed there's $22,000 for communications for the park. Park department. And I was curious what that was, because even our human resources has less of a budget for that.
Actually, communications is 200.
Is how much?
200.
I forget what page that's on. I saw $22,000 sticking out.
Not in parks.
I'll tell you what, I will find that. and
Might
ask
be
you
in
to look
police.
again.
Okay, let's see. Oh, looks like we've got some proprietary funds too. I just wanted a little explanation on Fund 101 Street Fund Revenue Summary. There's some highlights down at the bottom, and I just need a little bit more of an explanation. It's a lot of information.
The way we used to receipt in property tax revenue, we would send a certain percentage over to the street fund, and it was building a fund balance. And that was one of the things that Paul pointed out when we first hired him, was that we didn't need to do a certain percent-based transfer directly when we receipt the property tax. We should just be transferring money over as necessary for when the restricted street fund money is exhausted, then the general fund would pick up the support, and the property tax transfer would come later. So that way the fund didn't build up a fund balance.
All right.
What other sources of revenue are there for the street fund other than property tax?
Gas tax.
There's it's the MVET money.
Has been.
That's restricted for road use. It was the fund, I believe, that came from, it used to be more with the car taps, but now it's the gas tax related.
There's also second quarter fee.
For the slurry seal program.
Okay. Okay. Also, Fund 106, these are just general questions, these are our proprietary funds. Fund 106, second quarter real estate excise taxes fund. The streets slurry seal programs, 2011 versus 2012. I'm just wondering if we accounted for our brand-new East Street when we're budgeting for the slurry seals. So we won't need to do that for a while.
That's correct. We actually have a pavement management system that we use. So we look at different streets and we score those accordingly. And we'll put the slurry seal on some streets where we use a chip on other streets. Obviously, if it's new pavement like East Street, that would be included. Every street doesn't get a slurry seal every year or every 5 years. It's kind of on an ongoing basis, and we score each street separately, so if that answers your question.
Okay, thanks. Let's see, oh, PEG funds. Fund 118. Let's see. City webpage and newsletters is what we use this sort of thing for. I haven't seen a newsletter in, I don't know how many years, long time. How much do we need to spend to get a better website? Yeah, and then the newsletter question. I just think it's interesting that we have, these expenditures set aside, and they're not being used, or, that sort of thing.
We had hoped to have newsletters come out this year to where we could utilize those funds to do that. But with the turnover in finance, we weren't able to allocate enough time to do those newsletters. That is something that we, with the new city assistant to the city administrator, the website and the newsletter and the updates are all going to be top priority, #1 job for that new individual. So although we did budget for newsletters, I can safely say we did not spend money out of the fund on those, but we will definitely have that as a top priority for the end of the year and beginning of 2012.
Okay.
And Trevor, is Trevor still here? Trevor left. He is unique how he does that. Do we know where he is on the website relaunch?
I have not had a chance. He was out last week with the short week, and I haven't had a chance to touch base with him, but Trevor ever so graciously stepped in to take over the moving forward with the web design, as I just didn't have the time to allocate to it. So I know he's been pushing forward a meeting with Kyle and Eric, the IT companies, and we are making progress, but I haven't gotten specifics yet.
That'd be good for tomorrow.
Got it.
David?
I found that 22,000.
You did. Wonderful.
I may forget an account, but I never forget a dollar. Fund 001-04, City Buildings, Operations and Maintenance. It looks like it's about halfway through the book. It talks about communications, general public works communications, and it's up $7,000 this year to $22,000. And I was curious, what kinds of communications are those? Somebody's doing a lot of communicating.
Well, a lot of items going in communications, we have our phone system. We actually purchased some emergency radios this year as well.
Say no more. Now I understand it. It's not newspapers and
No.
things like that?
No.
Okay, I got you. Thank you.
Okay. No, my other two questions, so we already talked about, is the two funds, the facilities fund and the transportation fund, and they just lacked details on the expenditures, but we've already covered that. So those were all my questions.
Any items from other council members? I'm closing my book.
Please feel free to continue to contact me should you come across any other questions. And if you want to take time and come in and meet with me, I'm available, as are the other department heads, I'm sure.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, David. And we are at that point in the agenda for any comments from the public for council. Good evening, Mrs. Terrell.
Good morning.
Morning was a long time ago.
Morning is coming soon, fella. I'm Marilyn Tyrrell. I live at 950 G Street, which has no sidewalks to improve. I don't argue with the sidewalks on Addy. I understand the reason, but anyway. You're talking about Humane Society, and I want to say that the difference between the two, which is very basic, is first of all that most of the work is done there by volunteers. They do not have duties. They offer their services. They work free. The Humane Society has employees. But the Southwest Washington, David, is a kill shelter. 40% of the cats that go in there die. I don't know how many dogs, but our Humane Society is a no-kill shelter, and I think that's important. When we were talking, when Trevor and Joanne were talking, I made some notes, which is what the paper was here for. I think Washougal is lacking a lot in citizen empowerment. For example, and I'm not the source of all knowledge by any means, but our church does an overflow at the Lutheran Church in Vancouver for the homeless. It's called the Winter Homeless Overflow.
It's a good article in the paper.
Okay. We have churches here that could do that because there are no services of that nature here. And I can't believe that there's nobody in Washougal who doesn't need that. And since I plan on being an old lady someday, I'd like to know that there's some place for me to go if I should be homeless. And at the rate the government is going, my Social Security may not be there. One of the things on the chart here has a lot to do with the quality of life here. Martha and I and Paul and I don't know who else spent weeks and weeks and weeks 5 years ago designing this place. We designed, for those of you who don't know, we designed a really nice city hall, a nice library, a community center. There was something else.
Senior Center.
Senior center, okay. It didn't cost that much. Martha says it cost a lot more, but it would, if you got loose money running around, I would like to see some quality of life issues. If you built a nice new city hall, everybody say, well, they're spending the money on their fancy city hall. But we do have employees who do need better place to work. And we do need a better library. And maybe some of that could, maybe you could just do it piece by piece or some such arrangement. But I really do think that NPR did a special this morning from Camas, going around the cities in the Southwest Washington community. And talking about these wonderful Camas Library, and I just felt like I was living in the poor district or something. Camas does have a beautiful library, and we have very nice librarians, but they have no place to put anything. You were talking about website. I think we need more publicity. I'm constantly hearing about things that happened that I didn't know about. And since I show up here pretty often, I figure that I should be knowing about them. So something's, maybe I'm not receptive, but something's wrong. For example, I think East Street is quite wonderful. I think you are all doing a poor job in telling the people how wonderful it is. They think that you spent $5 million to repave a street. Well, that's not what it was. There were all these sewers and the required sidewalks from the grant, et cetera. So it's far more wonderful than people think, and I think they should know. When I came here in 2002, every night, about 40 minutes apart, I would hear beep, 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 chug, 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 and the trains went through. Because of the city, the trains don't do that anymore. There's a nice rubber track across 6th Street, so I don't have to listen to that. They don't go toot toot. I think you should start blowing your own horns about the things that you do. Well, you do, don't laugh at me, you do it. And, people say, oh, there's people at City Hall, but people at City Hall, I think, are producing, and I think they need more credit than they're being given. And I think you've got a terrific staff, even you.
Up here, we're not sure which one of the two you're looking at, so it's okay.
She knows.
I saw the eye contact. What? So I got the eye contact.
Thank you, Marilyn. I made a lot of notes, and most all of them are very positive, I think, if I put the right spin even to some of them. I think we're good. Any other members of the public wishing to address council?
Just quickly, Connie Jo Freeman, 5150 N Street. We were talking about newsletters, and it seems, if I remember right, the bar graph shows that people prefer website, but I don't just go to the city website one day, say, gee, I wonder what the city's doing, or what activities are going on. But when I get the Port little newsletter that comes out regularly, I actually sit down and read that, and I think, oh, I want to go to that. So that's my 2 cents. I think those newsletters are very effective. It's like a newspaper format. I know you all know what it looks like, but I would love to see the city communicate in paper. I think it's very effective. A lot of people in our community don't use the internet to the degree that our generation does. So there you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. Any other comments from the public? Okay. I think the only update I had, I'm going to leave for David.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't get a chance to send an email. Yeah, we would like to give you an update regarding the assistant to city administrator and mayor position that we've been recruiting for. And I'm very pleased to introduce to you, if you don't already know her, but after a very extensive recruitment and selection process, we had over 200 applicants, down to 3 finalists late last week. Very strong group of 3 finalists. The mayor and I decided to offer the position to our own Rose Jewell, and she has accepted. So she's very excited to assume the new duties, and I'm sure she's been listening to some of the comments about the enhanced communications, and that is absolutely, we even had conversation today over coffee about that being one of the highest priorities for her as we move forward. We also assured Mitch that we wouldn't leave him hanging in community development. We're a team, and so we will make sure that we take care of ourselves in terms of our staffing and community development and do a smooth transition. We have some ideas about how we might do that in a way that will be as efficient as can be and economical for us, so it may be helpful in that regard. So we're really pleased with that direction. Rose is a good choice, and I know that she's going to do a great job.
I would echo David's comments. I sat in a little bit, I stayed pretty much out of the process until we got towards the end and the interviews and the folks that actually came in, and then did my little fly in, fly out, listen here, listen there. And then mine and David's participation in the final interviews of the final three. They were three extremely strong, extremely well-qualified individuals and three vastly different individuals. But I'm here to tell you, I'm sure no surprise to anybody in this room, when you have someone who is already in the organization, you've got somebody who has been a member of the community at the time that Rose has, and you've got someone who absolutely loves coming to their job every day, that passion that she exuded and just what you could feel come out of her, that she wanted to move forward, she wanted some more challenges, she wanted to really take this position where it needs to go. I had no doubt. The conversations David and I had got a little bit protracted in trying to decide between the three, but only because we kept getting sidetracked on 12 other things in there. But I think for the most part, it came down to about a 10-minute decision once all was said and done. So, Rose, congratulations. I know that you're going to do extremely well, and there certainly, as everyone saw in the descriptions and in the conversations that we had about the position itself. I'm not sure why anybody would want this position. And even some of the people that were helping screen some of the folks that were in similar positions, were looking at it going, man, good luck, because you've just got so much inside of here. We're asking a lot of the individual that we were going to offer the position to, and I believe we're going to get a lot back from Rose in fulfilling that. So, congratulations. Items from council. John?
Ms. Terrell, we actually do have an organization that does put the homeless up in Washougal. The Salvation Army actually puts up the homeless in the local hotels. Yes, they do, just so you know. I Street and Washougal River Road, right across from the Masonic Lodge.
Other items? Rod?
Yeah, I'd like to give some credit where credit's due. I think the Rose will do a wonderful job, but she's been mentored by Mitch and Joanne and worked well with them, and they're in a leadership capacity, so I'd like to say thanks to both of you guys for mentoring her and getting her prepared for this move up in her lifetime and in her career, so it's a good deal for her. The other thing that I'd like to bring up is last Monday, I was sick and wasn't able to get here, and apparently there was some discussion about a political sign of mine in the wrong place. I know for a fact that the city Waterhouse is where the sign was that they were talking about. I know for a fact that it was put in the right-of-way. However, it got up in the city yard, it's anybody's guess. But that being said, I find it interesting that those who want to point fingers at me can do all kinds of things in this without being held accountable for the same thing. One sign I get brought up about in my campaign. Councilman Russell uses the city website logo on his Facebook signs. Nobody asked for that. Nobody asked for permission. Councilman Delavar was using his signs for position number 4, position number 6, and the U.S. Senate. Jennifer McDaniel, she called me one day about the signs that were put in the city right away across from her house. Before we got done, she was screaming on the phone, and when she finally took a breath, we pointed out, time to end this conversation, Jennifer, because you can't stop and let us have our say. Councilman Shoemaker, of all people, knows that we're here to enforce the laws of the city of Washougal. We had signs in the right-of-way up at Forest View, but according to the president of the Homeowners Association up there, she had so much pressure and so many threats, veiled threats, by Councilman Shoemaker that she forced us to take our signs down from a city right-of-way where we had the right to put those signs up. It irritates me just a little bit that I get one sign that's apparently been mispositioned, and I get it brought up at a council meeting, but we can't talk about the other things that are going wrong in how they ran their campaigns and put their signs out. So yes, if it's okay for me to get pointed out, how about we talk about everybody else and what they did or didn't do?
Given the lateness of the hour, I will postpone my discussion of the Washington Transportation Commission, other than to say that I was there from 8:30 in the morning until 5:30 at night. It was a very interesting and also grueling kind of thing to sit through. I just wanted to mention to Marilyn that the Civic Center project, which was a new city hall, library, community room, and senior center, was a $7.5 million project. Camas Library cost $25 million. We went out for a bond issue that we needed 60% to win. We got 47. That's it.
Other items? David?
Just for the record, I don't make veiled threats. If I'm going to make a threat, it's going to be a threat.
Then let's put it on record as a threat then, because that's what we got in the email from your homeowners association.
Not at all. And I'd be happy to talk with you about that, Rod.
Jennifer?
Absolutely. First of all, I wasn't screaming at anyone. I was trying to get a word in edgewise, and then I was hung up on, so I'll leave it at that. And this was regarding a sign that was put, many signs that were put in my neighbor's yard across the street, and someone
Many
came to
times or
my
twice?
door, someone came to my door and basically laid into my 14-year-old son about something that was happening when, you know, he has absolutely no idea what's going on with this, okay? He didn't need to be brought into this discussion. All right, 2 questions on payables. Let's see. Chief Schumacher? Sorry to put you on the spot. I was reviewing payables, and I had a question about the photo session that you had recently. Is that something we do every year?
It's something we haven't done in probably 7 or 8 years, I think, maybe Councilman Morrison. When was the last department?
I think it was about that time, somewhere in the last 10 years.
10 years, so this is just something that we did. We have a department photo, and we have some individual photos as well, so I thought that was cool. I'm not sure where the department's headed this time next year, so we thought we'd get a nice photo of all the paid staff and the volunteers.
I see. Okay, next question was Cascade Tree Service. I know we've used them in the past. Do they use a city truck when they go around and trim the trees, or do they use their own truck?
No, they wouldn't use a city vehicle.
Okay. I was just curious to know, we pay a lot to do the tree trimming and all of that sort of thing, and just recently I saw, I think it was this morning, someone out in front of my house on Main Street in a city vehicle trimming trees. Was that a city employee?
It could have been, I'm not exactly sure.
Okay. Well, I mean, what I'm getting at is that if we do this in-house, you know, we've got additional bills coming from a tree service. And
I don't think we do it all in-house. And those are the differences you're going to see, things that we can reasonably get to with the tools that we've got and the expertise that our folks have got versus the stuff they can look at and say, I'm not going to drop that on my head.
Okay.
Or climb that.
Yeah.
Right, so this is like high-risk sort of a thing where
Right.
you really want someone who's bonded or has the insurance and that sort of thing?
If they're maybe leading toward a property that, you know, could cause property damage, so, you know, we'll hire a professional tree service to come in, or if they're close to power lines, things like that.
Okay. Interesting. Also, there is still time to get your Washougal School Foundation Trail Band concert tickets. That concert is coming up on the 26th of November. It's in the evening, and it's at the high school in the auditorium. It's a tradition that the Washougal Schools Foundation puts on this fundraiser every year. And if you like Roger Daniels' phone number, he's selling the tickets, and as I said, there's plenty still available, not plenty, but some, still available in 3 different pricing categories. So please see me afterwards, and I can get you his phone number. That's it.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I know last week I did make comments about a political sign. To my recollection, I did not mention the candidate sign specifically. And I wanted to put that on the record that.
You did.
Did I?
Yes.
At the very least, my comments were aimed at the city, not at the candidate. And it had to do with the city's responsibility on their own property, not the candidate. Because I know a lot of people change where signs are, take them from one place, move them to another place. My comments were directed at the city.
Thank you. Any other items?
I must have heard Jennifer wrong. I thought she said that Chief Schumacher had a photo shoot of his own, and I was like, we're paying for that?
Figuring he's going to show up. It's going to be
I was
firefighter
like,
calendars
wow,
or
look at that.
Yeah, that was my next question. What kind of photos are we looking at here?
Speaking of the fire department, this weekend is the Turkey Carnival. Everybody come and have a good time.
I would entertain a motion for adjournment. Oh, we're adjourned.
Awesome.
I got lost.